China's tyranny was built by American companies that put profit before basic human rights. And now, they might get the pantsuit off them. Pants made from Chinese slave labor. Welcome to China Uncensored, I'm Chris Chappell. Human rights really get in the way of doing big business, don't you think? I mean, that's essentially what Bill Gates said when he was in Beijing in 1994. He said, it's a little strange to tie free trade to human rights issues. It's basically getting down to interference in internal affairs. Yeah, and just think how much cheaper Chinese goods would be if they hired even younger kids, made them work even longer hours, and didn't pay them at all. You'd save like $13 a year at Walmart. Worth it. Sure, the Chinese Communist Party tortures dissidents with electric cattle prods, but they also have a lot of money. So that obviously balances out karma-wise. The problem is there's a lot of these do-gooders in the world who don't think profit is the greatest good. They think freedom of belief and expression and not being tortured to death are the greatest goods. I'd like to see their 401ks. Unfortunately, the U.S. Commerce Department put a bunch of roadblocks to big business. After the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989, they put a bunch of restrictions on trade. U.S. companies couldn't sell things like handcuffs, helmets, or shotguns to Chinese police. That's just money left on the table, if you ask me. And Chinese police need those tables clear so they can tie dissidents to them and torture them with electric cattle prods. The good news is that eventually the U.S. helped China get into the World Trade Organization in 2001. And then for many years, the U.S. Commerce Department had no qualms with American tech companies working directly with the Chinese police. I mean, when have tech companies working with authoritarian regimes ever led to anything bad? Except for that time with IBM and the Nazis. Anyway, when you think about it, isn't sharing technology the best thing for human rights? As one California-based tech CEO said, anything that helps China to modernize will help China to improve its human rights situation. Of course, he said that back in 2006 when, well, no, that was still as stupid back then as it is today. The problem is because American tech companies in the early 2000s treated China like one giant gold rush, China was able to turn the book 1984 into an instruction manual. There are a lot of examples. Microsoft has worked with the Chinese military on AI research. Thermo Fisher was selling DNA kits that I'm sure were very useful for harvesting organs from political prisoners. If there was money in it, I'd bet they make China an anti-saying Xi Jinping looks like Winnie the Pooh gun. Then when criticized, they would claim, how were we supposed to know that they'd use them on people who said Xi Jinping looked like Winnie the Pooh? But one company in particular had a very special role. Cisco Systems. Cisco saw how the Chinese Communist Party was monitoring and arresting people and thought, what a great opportunity to sell more routers. So Cisco built systems that helped the Chinese Communist Party track and censor the internet. In fact, they were sued for it. But in 2014, that case was thrown out. Not on substance, but a technicality. At the time, U.S. District Judge Edward Davila ruled that there were credible claims that Cisco specifically marketed itself as being helpful in persecuting dissidents, but he wasn't convinced the company could be sued in the U.S. for alleged abuses committed overseas, which was a great relief to everyone at the Amazon baby leather factory in Cambodia. But this lawsuit refused to die, unlike all those dissidents China killed since then. Last week, a federal appeals court called the Ninth Circuit said the lawsuit alleging Cisco aided Chinese torture may now proceed. Will American tech companies finally be held accountable? I'll tell you right after this quick commercial break. Welcome back. Unless YouTube demonetized us again, then all you saw was a black screen. But I mean, I can't imagine why YouTube's parent company Google would want to do that to an episode about American tech companies aiding CCP crimes. Can you? So as I said, after being thrown out in 2014, the lawsuit against Cisco has been accepted by an appeals court. That doesn't mean Cisco is liable. It just means the judges felt there was enough evidence to appeal the case and let it actually be heard in court. This is a real pain for Cisco. So much for the courts backing multi-billion-dollar corporations. Corporations are people too, you know. The lawsuit alleges that Cisco Systems Inc. and two former executives aided the Chinese government in tracking and torturing adherents of the Falun Gong. Falun Gong is the Chinese spiritual practice that became widely popular in China during the 90s, until there were more people practicing it than there were members of the Chinese Communist Party, and then the party decided to beat them up and put them into labor camps instead. And it wasn't that Cisco technology was being misused by the CCP, like it was all some big misunderstanding, no. The allegations say Cisco specifically advertised its technology to China as being really useful in helping go after religious dissidents like Falun Gong. Cisco says the claims have no basis, though. That isn't what the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals said. After the lawsuit was allowed to move through, Paul Hoffman, an attorney for the Falun Gong plaintiffs, said, "What this means is that tech companies, and other companies for that matter, will not be able to engage in activity that aids and abets torture in other countries." Imagine what would happen if American companies were actually held accountable for their actions in China. There's a reason Nike, Adidas, and Apple lobbied to stop a Uyghur slave labor bill a few years ago. Yes, they protested a slave labor bill. That's because they like slave labor in China. It's like that old saying, an apple a day is cutting into productive work time. Pick up the pace, you worthless dissidents. The technology Cisco helped build for China was called Golden Shield. It was the beginning of what people now call the Great Firewall of China. It originally started as a way to persecute Falun Gong practitioners, but it's been used for so much more since. For instance, in 2019, making sure that chatter of a mysterious virus of unknown origin would be scrubbed from the Chinese internet. And as I said, when have tech companies working with authoritarian regimes ever led to anything bad? I wish just once when I ask this type of question, it actually be rhetorical. There are a couple of things that could happen now as the appeal has been granted. This ruling was made by a 3-judge panel of the Ninth Circuit Court. Cisco could petition for an 11-judge panel to make a new ruling, or it could appeal up to the Supreme Court. But considering the current Supreme Court, that could be a ruling many American companies would not want made, so Cisco may hesitate to go that far. But if the case moves forward, which it seems like it will, Hoffman said he's going to start seeking internal records from Cisco and deposing its executives, which also could be really bad for Cisco. But let's remember the real victims here. No, not them. The American corporations that stand to lose big money. As Bloomberg News, which is tied to billionaire Michael Bloomberg, whose finance company relies on the China market, says, this case threatens to exacerbate tensions between the U.S. and China. Bloomberg News says the U.S. and China are tumbling into a tit-for-tat trade war, and both sides are restricting exports critical to advanced technologies. Yeah, think of all the advanced technologies the U.S. is getting from China, But China is getting advanced technology from the U.S. And remember, anything that helps China modernize will help China improve its human rights situation. In fact, even in the Ninth Circuit Court, one of the judges was worried about the impact on international relations. She said finding of liability in this case would necessarily require showing that the Chinese Communist Party and Ministry of Public Security violated international law. I mean, we know China is committing genocide, killing people for their organs, and using rape as a form of torture, but if we actually said that in court, then it could really make doing business with them seem somehow dirty. And is that what we really want? Remember what the Bible says. Money is the root of all wealth. I learned that in Catholic school. So won't someone please think of the children and how we can put them to work? So do you think American companies should be held accountable for their actions in China? Let me know in the comments below. And as a thank you to all the fans who make China Uncensored possible by contributing on patreon.com/China Uncensored, because YouTube keeps demonetizing us, I'll answer one of your questions on the show. Today's question comes from Timothy. Hey Chris, what do you think would happen if the PRC accidentally attacks a U.S. naval ship? Say they also formally apologized and sent an indemnity. similar to what Imperial Japan did in the USS Panay incident. Do you think the US government would tuck its tail between its legs and take the apology? Timothy, I'm offended. This is the United States of America we're talking about. Greatest country on earth. Do you think we would bow to China repeatedly on several different occasions? Okay, yeah, you may have a point. The problem is a lot of people in the Biden administration came from the Obama administration, and they come from a camp that believes we have to engage with China. Many in the US government, Bush era too, believed that doing business with China was the best way to bring democratic reform to China. And as we saw with Secretary of State Blinken's trip to China and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen's trip, they'll go pretty far to try and normalize relations with China. Kind of like how the "this is fine" dog tries to normalize living in a burning building. Now we know the CCP likes to push the envelope. Back in May, a Chinese fighter jet buzzed a US plane over international waters in the South China Sea. Would they go so far as to accidentally destroy a US military vessel? I think it depends on how they think the US president would react. I don't think that would have gone over under Trump. Under this administration, let's hope we don't find out. Thanks for your question and your support, Timothy. Thank you for watching. If you want to support China Uncensored, all it takes is as little as $1 an episode over on patreon.com/China Uncensored. You get a bunch of cool perks, including the chance to have me answer your question on the show. And best of all, you'll be helping us stick it to the CCP. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.